All right, Ronnie, you wanna?
Head up. Head up. Head up. Two.
Well, there is no doubt that you got the front part right. Oh, that was good stuff right there. Good stuff. It is the Pentateuch. All right.
Half families gotta work together.
Yes, I have, I get that.
That's how marriage works, work together.
Yep.
Y'all ask me every board, but really, what is it, what's it? It is two.
All right. What's the books?
Exodus.
Very good. All right. What's the next section?
History.
Ezra.
All right. What's the next section?
Wisdom.
Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Psalms.
All right. Next section.
Isaiah. Jeremiah. Daniel.
All right. Next section. All right.
Isaiah. Joel. Hey, God.
All right. What's the in-between section? All right. All right. Well, since Barbara's not here, what's the two collections? Apocrypha. What does that mean? Hidden or veiled writings. And what's the other one? The pseudepigrapha. And what does that one mean? False writings. Very good. I gave you the Gospels.
Gotta keep Mark, John.
It skipped on me. Sometimes that button will get stuck in the top of my head.
You go to preach.
Acts.
All right.
Romans.
Big section. Paul's letters. All right. And it's the first one is Romans. All right. Then there's a subsection.
Prison.
All right. Prison epistles.
Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians.
All right. What comes after that? Nope. Not yet. It's two books. There you go. First, Second Thessalonians, and then the pastoral epistles. All right.
First, second, Timothy.
And then finish off the prison epistles by Lehman. All right. And then there's another big section. It's called the general epistles or general letters, and it's Hebrews. First, Second, Third John,
Revelation.
and one book in this one section, apocalyptic. All right, Revelation is the only book of prophecy and is considered apocalyptic in language or nature. So, like I said last week, some people include it in the general epistles. I don't. It does the language, the imagery, everything about it does not match all the other general epistles. So I always consider a section by itself apocalyptic. And it is the Revelation, the book of Revelation. Do you remember what Revelation means?
Faith and good.
To unveil. It means revelation, and it means to unveil something. Now remember, that's the English title. If you look at the Greek, it's apocalypsis, which is where in a lot of Bibles, especially some of your older Bibles, you'll see the apocalypse of John. And so they take apocalypsis, the Greek word, and interchange it over into the English word, apocalypse, and we get revelation. We changed it to revelation, to just a different one. Either one is fine. It doesn't change anything about the book. It's just a title. And they really didn't have titles back when they were written anyway. That was something else that we gave them. So, yeah. They had a way of distinguishing when a verse ended and began, and when there was a paragraph or a section. But it wasn't until later when they actually give it chapters and numbers. So, I think that's astounding. The Hebrew didn't have vowels in it. It was just all consonants. So, you know, as hard as the Hebrew language is anyway, try and read it without the consonants, or without the vowels, I mean. It's quite fun. All right, so the authorship, we've already talked about, comes from John. A couple church leaders, Polycarp and Papias, they were people that lived pretty close to John's time, and they wrote down in their own writings that we have today that John was the writer of Revelation, the 3 epistles with his name, and also the Gospel of John. So, you know, there's always contention, you know, especially with Revelation. Revelation is probably one of the most contested books in the Bible. It was one of the, I think it was the very last book that was accepted into the canon of Scripture that we've talked about whenever the early church had a kind of a finalization of the books that should be included in the Bible based on certain criteria. Revelation was, I think, the last one that was included. But, you know, there's always been contention with it, so, you know, sometimes you just can't get around that. But, you know, when you have historical evidence that says somebody wrote the thing, you know, that's pretty good evidence. So I'll trust what they wrote down and left for us. You know, I mean, we trust them on other stuff they wrote. Why would we not do that? Seems kind of ridiculous, but, you know, there's always people who want to throw cold water on the fire of the Holy Spirit, but guess what? It ain't going to happen. Jesus is going to win. That's what this book's about. So they can keep trying, but it ain't going to work. As far as the dating of this, again, there's a lot of contention with that. Most reliable sources will say that John wrote it around 95 to 96 AD. This was the last book in the New Testament canon that was written. And this was written after John was exiled to the island of Patmos, and they believe that you know, I'm a believer in providence, and when I say providence, I'm not talking about this church. I'm talking about providence in the sense of what it means in God's terms. You know, providence is basically the things that God works out. You know, we might walk through life and say, you know, I just don't see how that's going to work. And then somewhere down the road, God works it out. But He already had a plan. Well, that was God's providence working. You know, and you know, one of the best examples of providence in the Bible is the book of Esther. It is one of, I think there's 2 books in the Bible that don't mention God specifically. Esther's one of them. Esther might be the only one, but I know Esther is one at least that doesn't mention the name of God, but you can find God all over it. And you can see God's providence work out for His people. Because if you look at what Haman was trying to do, I mean, he had them dead to rights. But what did God do? God said, I got other plans. I got other plans. Let me show you something. And so Haman ended up hanging off the same gallows that he had built.
Himself.
Yeah, that he had built, to hang Mordecai from. He ended up hanging it from himself. I mean, you can't tell me that God didn't work that out, So, I mean, that's providence. That's seeing God working in things. And so that's...
That means God can change things around like He wants to.
Exactly. And so what we saw, we see John, who was the last of the original disciples. All the other ones had been martyred. And so John, according to Christian tradition, and we've talked about this before, that they tried to kill him by tradition has it. They tried to poison him and they tried to boil him in oil, and that didn't work. They tried to deep fry him and it didn't work. And so I guess they figured that, well, if they can't kill him, then they're just going to send him off. So these people, these higher ups, they thought, well, if we can expel John, then this will stop, this leader of the Christian church. And so they said, well, we'll send him off to an imprisonment camp. How'd that work out? We see God's providence working all over that. God took him and put him there for a specific reason. And it's from there that we get the book of Revelation. Now, this is really, it's not so much John authoring anything as it is him just writing down what he's been shown and told. So, in that sense, it might be a little bit different than some of the other books that we've read in the Bible. They're all inspired, but this one was a little bit different. John landed on Patmos. God gave him vision, said, here, write this down. So he did. So we have Revelation. Let's talk about Patmos for a little bit. The Isle of Patmos. And I will get to a map showing where it is, because I think Ronnie had asked for that. It's not a big map, but it shows where it's at in relation to the churches of Revelation. But just a little bit about the Isle of Patmos. It's about 6 miles wide and 10 miles long, so it's not a big island. It's very, very little island. It's about 40 to 50 miles off the coast from where Ephesus is. So, the way the crow flies, 40, 50 miles, it's not too far from, Ephesus, which John was a leader of. And after he was let loose from Patmos and sent back, he remained in Ephesus as the leader there for quite some time. It was a seaport, and the reason for it being a seaport, if you look at a map, and we'll look at it in a moment, but the way that the sea breeze blows across the Mediterranean Sea, the way that the island is shaped in a crescent. So if you go on the other side of the island, it actually shields. It would actually create a safe haven for sailors once they sailed in there, because the way that it was shaped, it helped keep some of the wind off of their ships in rough seas. So it was a strategic seaport for several different reasons. During the Roman Empire, this was a resettlement of prisoners. And so obviously here John was basically an enemy of the state. By this time Christianity was starting to be persecuted more and more. So John was seen as a threat. And so John was exiled to the Isle of Patmos to shut him up. You know, he's an old man by this point. Let's put him to work. Historians say that that the Isle of Patmos had a lot of caves. It was very hilly, and in these caves, they would make them go in there and mine these caves, mine them of precious materials. So they thought, well, we'll put John to the test. We'll exile him. We'll put him to some hard work, and that'll fix him right up. Maybe maybe their thoughts were he'll die on us. Well, that didn't work out either. You know, if you remember Jesus talking and saying, talking about how John was going to stay around. Well, I think it's going to take a little bit more and some hard work to get rid of John if God says He's going to keep him around. So God really had His hand in that as far as we talk about providence. And it was also just a place of seclusion. I mean, it wasn't a paradise by any means. It wasn't an island that was a destination resort. Like you'd see some places today. Because of the terrain and different things like that, it really wasn't. It wasn't a vacation spot. And plus, since the Romans had it, they made it into a prisoner encampment. So of course, that's not a place we want to go stay either. But that's just a little bit about Patmos. There's not a whole lot, not a lot there really. There are some stuff there now. There are some. I guess it's Christian tradition too, that says that John, they know where the cave is, that John wrote this, and so they built a monastery on top of it. Now, whether or not this is the exact cave, because there's more than one cave on the Isle of Patmos, there's a lot of them, so, do we know exactly, was this the cave? There's no indication, scribbled on the wall that said John was here, or anything like that. So, we don't know, but at any rate, we know John was there somewhere, but, they went back and they built a monastery there. In fact, there's more than one. There's several monasteries there now. So, Christianity left its mark there, whether we know the exact cave or not. That's irrelevant, but at any rate, you'll find monasteries there. Now, a few things. I wanted to talk about some key themes, with the book of Revelation. But I also wanted to talk about the 7 churches, because I think the 7 churches kind of build the foundation for what we see in the rest of Revelation. So we'll go through that today, through the 7 churches, and then we'll get to key verses next week. And I know I did get one question about the 2 witnesses, so we'll cover that next week. But if you have any other questions that pertain to the text of Revelation, any verses or anything like that, jot that down and let me get it today, whatever your question is, or get it to me before next Wednesday, so I can try and answer those questions, because otherwise we're just going to hit some high points and then we're going to be done. So if you want to know more about it, you got to let me know. All right, so some key themes that we'll uncover here in Revelation is that through His death, Christ has conquered Satan and ransomed His people to be a kingdom of priests. I know that scares some folks to death. Said, you mean I can't just come and be a bench warmer? You mean I actually got to do something? That's something I think most Christians understood when they were able to read the Bible for themselves. It seemed like we've kind of gotten in a generational rut where people think, well, if I just show up to church, then that's enough. And I think every church has that problem. But, the thing is about being a servant. How often and how much in the Gospels does Christ talking about serving Him? In what capacity does that look like? Well, everybody has different gifts. So within those gifts that God has given you, then you can use those gifts to serve Him at, wherever your ministry is. Everybody has a ministry, whether you think you do or not. Everybody has been called to a particular place and time within this whole church structure that you're supposed to do. And when you neglect those things, I think it's a great disservice to the church, but it's a bigger disservice to God, because He's the one who gave you those gifts to start with, and you're not glorifying Him. So, He says in the first chapter that He has made us a kingdom of priests. Now, the Bible tells us that the Spirit has given people gifts, and there are some people called to be pastors. There are some who are called to be teachers. There are some called to be encouragers. There's some that have been called in the world of finance, and they can, in churches, people need, churches today are run like a business. You need to know the ins and outs, and, thankfully, God has sent people to our church who know about finances and have helped us along, but, you don't want everybody running finances for the church, do you?
No.
All right, so, there's people called to different things, and whatever those gifts are, people can step up and serve the church however they are gifted. And I don't want to say this too lightly, but everybody's gift is valuable in the church, no matter how significant you might think it is. And so we have been called a kingdom of priests, and He didn't specify, whether it's pastors or lay people or people who are called into the health field or financial or whatever it might be. He's saying here, His people. And who are His people? Us, here. We're His people. And we all do different things. We've all been called to different areas. Even Terry was called into ministry, but he and I, our ministries they're not the exact same. They're a little different. But we're all of us have been called to be a kingdom of priests, and what that means is that we minister to people, in however that looks. And that's something, to me, I think that sets a stage right in the very first chapter. Right in the beginning of chapter 1, he tells us that we are a kingdom of priests. And the only way that we can be that is because Him conquering Satan, defeating sin, defeating death, that's the only way He could do that. And so He's done that. And so He's allowed us to be this kingdom of priests. And, of course, I think that's one of the things that maybe draws on some Old Testament imagery. Because if you look in the Old Testament prophets, they talked about a time when they would rule and reign as a kingdom of priests, they would oversee the Gentiles in this new kingdom that would come. Well, Revelation is outlining this new kingdom to come, and so these prophets, they saw these visions. And so here, as a group of people, we've seen that. And we've seen this here. I'm going to turn the AC on because I'm starting to get hot. And I'm seeing some heavy ideas. So, I don't want y'all to fall asleep on me. And I'll freeze you and wake you up. But through His death, now this is something that's highlighted, that He's the sacrificial lamb. He's the one that's worthy. That's repeated. That's something that's repeated over and over again. We have been ransomed by Him. And we see that in some other areas as well. Another key theme is that Jesus is present through the Holy Spirit on earth and understands theirs and ours, trials and triumphs. And the reason I put theirs because it's we're talking specifically about Revelation. And when we look at the first 3 chapters specifically, it talks about that a lot. So this is a key theme that the Spirit has come, the Spirit is present, the Spirit is available. And, in talking to these churches, he tells them, he understands, in the book of Hebrews, we talk about that a lot. He came as a man so that he could sympathize with our weaknesses. So when we have weaknesses, when we have troubles, that's why we can be confident in going to him, because he knows what it is that we are feeling too. And so he's telling them, says, look, I've been there and I've done that and I overcame so that you also can overcome. And that's something we see repeated in each church that is mentioned. And it's an overall theme throughout the book is that you can overcome. But it's not through your own power. You can overcome through the blood of the Lamb, the one who is worthy. Again, a repeated theme throughout, and it's because he triumphed, not us, because he did. That's why we can triumph. Another key theme is that world history and its future are firmly in God's control. Thank goodness for that. Thank goodness it's not in our control. I remember a band I listened to for a while, and still do once in a while. They're not together anymore, but they wrote this song. It was talking about judgment, and it said it was basically to the extent I'm glad I'm not God, because if I was, everybody'd be dead. He was talking, he's talking about how, as people, we are so insufficient to run anything, and that God is the only one who is able and worthy to do it. And so, it may seem a little harsh at first glance, but when you really think about it, there's a lot of wisdom in that lyric. Because you think about how many times somebody's made you mad, you think, well, if I could, I'd just take them on out of here. So thank God he is God and we are not. But he has always been in control, and that's one of the things that people often ask. Where was God during this time or whatever?
The Bible says his ways is higher than our ways.
And they are, and we don't always understand them. But at least with us being able to look back in history, and even then when he was writing this, when he was seeing these visions, writing these down, and seeing how God is in control, all one had to do was look back on the history of the Jewish people and say, you don't think God was in control? People have been trying to annihilate them ever since God declared, you were my people.
Amen.
And so, the simple fact that they still exist today, that there's a nation today, that there's history there,
It's driving.
you can't tell me that God is not in control. Now, like I said, doesn't mean people ain't tried, because they've been trying for a long, long time to annihilate them. And it ain't happened. And guess what? It ain't going to.
Amen.
It's because God is in control. Now, when John was writing this, he had history to look back on. But he was writing about things that had not happened yet, that was in the future. We don't know how far into the future. But he saw there, he said, God was in control of the past. Well, right now he's in control of the present, because he's given me these visions to write and to record so I can hand them out to others. And he's in control of the future too. So, there we have a picture of past, present, and future where God is in control. And again, I can't say this enough, thank God He's in control.
Amen.
Now, another key theme that we see here. God is presently restraining His own wrath to redeem His saints. So, when we look at the message that He gave to the 7 churches, those messages also apply to us in situations. The overarching message of all the 7 churches, they do apply to us. The message that we find throughout the rest of the book of Revelation, when God is outpouring His wrath on the people who are here suffering, not necessarily God's judgment, but they're suffering persecution unlike it's ever been seen before. God, even in that moment, He's restraining His full wrath until His people are fully redeemed. Till His people, to the ones that are going to come to Him, He's given them opportunity after opportunity, and there's going to be a time where, as He goes through these things, it's going to come to an end, and there's not going to be any more chances for anybody who's left here. Now, one of the very interesting things that I find in Revelation is that, in one of the judgments where it's talking about these, the great, I think it was the stones were falling on them, and they were begging for the stones to fall on them and kill them. The interesting thing there is they know who it's coming from, because it says that they cursed God and wish that His judgment would take them out. So they know full well where this is coming from. That's always amazed me, that even some people who know that God is in control of what is happening in the world still refuse to accept Him.
Would there be people in hell?
No. No, this is talking about people on the earth during His judgment.
Also, people in hell will do about the same thing, I think.
Well,
They know that God,
well, they made their choice.
they made their choice.
Yeah, they made their choice.
But God sent them there, so.
No, they sent themselves there.
Yeah, you're right,
Yeah, He sent.
you're right.
He sent His Son so that they wouldn't have to go there. But they sent themselves there.
Amen.
But it was just, it's just one of those things I've always found interesting, that they recognize where the judgment's coming from, and they still refuse it. So
But
it's,
still, you reckon they'll blame God?
well, they did. They do.
Yeah,
It says that they're cursing God for all that's going on.
yeah, right.
But, even think about today, those that are going out and preaching the gospel, and, one of our own, Joan Long, her granddaughter is going, is it Zimbabwe? Is that Zimbabwe or Mozambique?
Zimbabwe.
It's in Zimbabwe. But she's been there before, but they want her to come back. God could pour out His wrath on us at any time. He's simply restraining it right now because there's people yet to be saved. Yeah. So, this is a key theme that we see throughout Revelation, but there's going to be a time where it's said and done. God's not fooling around. He pours out His full wrath. Now remember, wrath is His judgment on unbelieving mankind. There's not an instance in the Bible where God poured out His wrath directly on his people. It's not there. Now, it doesn't mean that sometimes, bad things happen, and we've talked about this before, like with Noah. God's wrath was poured out on mankind. That doesn't mean that Noah didn't have it nice and easy. Everything was peachy and rosy, because it wasn't. Noah had it rough. He had to build the ark. He had to wait for the rain. He had to listen to the scorn. He had to listen to all the stuff coming from everybody else, people he knew, and that he had been around for a long time. Relationships that he had. And then he also had to, once the door closed, he had to listen to all them people scream. All them people die. So he didn't have it easy, even though God's wrath was being poured out. And so we see some of the same things, except Jesus, remember when Jesus was talking about it, he said that it's going to be even worse than it was in Noah's day. And so, there's going to be people during this time that are saved, that fall in love with Jesus and accept Him as their Savior, and they're going to die. They're going to have a choice. They're going to be able to accept the mark, or they're going to be able to accept Christ, and they're going to choose Christ, and they're going to die for it. So there are people who do pay a sacrifice even while God's wrath is being poured out on unbelieving mankind.
That's during the rapture.
Depends on how you look at it. Depends on whatever view you take of it, because there's plenty of those too. And a good Bible scholar can make his case for each of them and make it sound very believable. But like I always say, it's don't test the waters, just be ready, and then that way you ain't got to worry about it either way. But it's one of those things we're not going to know till it happens. So. But again, this falls back to God's in control. God's fully in control. Now, like I said, I wanted to talk about the 7 churches. So, the audience that John is writing to, he mentions specifically letters that are written to the 7 churches, but these letters are also written for us, for believers everywhere. There is something that we can get out of these. Now, I don't know about you, but I know at least at some point in my life, when I would pick up Revelation, I would kind of gloss over these letters. Did you ever do that? I mean, you read them, but you really didn't they just weren't as interesting as some of the other stuff that you wanted to get to. But when you really look at, understand the 7 churches, you don't want to skip them, because there's so much to these churches. I think it was a few years ago, I did a sermon series on the 7 churches of Revelation. And, I tried to explain, the spiritual significance that each one contains, especially in regards to us. But we're going to talk a little bit about, the audience here and some of the specifics about this group. Now, the first one that we encounter is the church of Ephesus. So just to give you some things about Ephesus. Ephesus was a big city, and it was one of the most influential cities during that time. They had a great melting pot of different peoples there. There was a lot of different religious groups there. And then, with Christianity coming in, Paul had went there and had established churches and some of his disciples, and obviously John was there John was there ministering as a leader of the church, and then after his release from Patmos, he went back and was there. Some say to up until his death in 125. They say he died somewhere around 125 AD. So John, you think about how old John was at that time. He was pretty old. So I don't know how old he would have been. He had to have been at least 100, I'd guess, or maybe more. Probably it'd have to have been more than that. It had to have been a very old person. But at any rate, this was a special city to John, a special city to Christianity, because there were a lot of good things that happened there. It was huge on trade. A lot of trade happened there. With it being a seaport, obviously there was a lot of things there. And, on any trading route, you're going to have a lot of different people come through. And so the fact that there's a church there and you got different peoples coming through, I think that's one of the marks that we see of the Christian church is building in places where there's crossroads of culture. We see that with Israel. You always ask the question, why did God put them there? Why was that the promised land? Well, if you look at even at the earliest evidence of civilization, God put them there because that was a major trade route. From the east to the west to the north and the south, they all had to come through Israel. So why do you think God put them right in the middle of everybody? It's so that everybody that passed through Israel would be exposed to the God of the Hebrews. The same thing with us. God plants us somewhere where we're in the crossroads of culture, where we expose people to the Savior that we know, Jesus. Or at least that's what we're supposed to be doing. But that's what was happening here. They had great harbors. They were maintained. At one point, they got lazy and they quit maintaining it. And so people started using other harbors. And then once that happened, you started seeing the city die out a little bit. They had a really big seaport. Let me go through the rest of these, and then I got some pictures I want to show you. Smyrna was another one of the 7 churches. Pergamum. Some of you may see a different name in your Bibles. We'll talk about that in just a second. Thyatira. Sardis. Philadelphia. And the one that probably everybody knows the most is Laodicea. Everybody got those? I'll give you a minute. Finish writing those down. Tell me when y'all got them all done. Now, one of the things that Ephesus, and most of these cities, but specifically Ephesus, they were known for their manufacture of idols. So they made quite a few idols. Paul had warned the Ephesian church that false teachers would come in after he left. And they did. But here's your little map, so you can see. Now, see Patmos right there where that little red dot is? It's a little bitty island. 6 to 8 miles, 6 miles wide, 10 miles long. So it's not a big one anyway. It's very tiny off the coast there. But you can see that Ephesus is the closest there. You could travel to all these. There was a road that you could travel to all these two. But when we look at the church of Ephesus, Ephesus had one of the largest amphitheaters that they had at that time. Now, outdoor theater was very popular during that day. This was like going to the movie theater today. This was their movie theater. They would have poets come in and great philosophers come in. What Paul did, Paul would come in and say, "Hey, let me tell you about something a little more important." But look at that. Isn't that huge? 25,000 plus seating. The Greensburg Coliseum won't even hold that many people. That's 25,000 plus seating. Now, they only build something like that if they got people that's going to sit in them. So, there are a great many people there. And then this road here, this would have been considered these long walkways, kind of like, how a flea market, or if you go to the fall festival, they'll set up all these vendors. Well, that's what they would do here, is that they would set vendors all up and down these roads. So that was something else that Paul had to encounter. And so you can see how, they would build these on the hillside. They were very steep, and they were naturally, as people would talk, being on the hillside, it would naturally carry the sound, so they could hear very well. So not only was this a thriving town with entertainment, it was also known for one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, the Temple of Artemis, or Diana. Now this is what remains of it. Those things right there, those columns are very tall. And I don't really think we understand the sheer size of this, but here's an artist rendering of what they thought that it looked like when it was, based on the remains that are there now, and stuff that was written down. The temple itself was 425 feet long. Now think about that. $425 feet long. Pretty big, ain't it?
Well, it's a football field and a half.
Yeah, longer than a football field. 220 feet wide. It was 60 feet tall, or at least the columns were 60 feet tall. You see all these white columns going around it? There was 127 marble pillars that was laced with gold and silver. So you can imagine the sight, being a place that relied very heavily on foreign gods, idol worship. The Temple of Diana. Most of these gods and goddesses, there was a lot of sexual immorality that went along with certain gods and goddesses. And God of Diana, Artemis, that was one of them. And so the temple itself employed thousands of prostitutes. Well, that's what we would call them. We call them prostitutes, but they called them, temple priests and priestesses. And people would come in from all over, and the priests and priestesses would serve the people that come in. And you got to understand something when you think about terms of service. Their idea of service was something that was sensuality, carnal pleasure. You think about what Jesus said was serving. So this was just a modern, well, I guess today we would call it an ancient brothel, high-tech brothel, basically.
Yeah,
Yep. Talk about the church of Smyrna. Now, Smyrna was located about 35 miles north of Ephesus, and it's actually it's only one of the 7 cities that still exists to this day. And its modern name is Izmir, I-Z-M-I-R, Izmir. Now there's, I think y'all probably heard of a Greek poet by the name of Homer. Smyrna is one of the cities that say that this was Homer's hometown. And so, Homer being an exceptional poet of his day, we still read his stuff today, and his works are one of the most sold and most famous in our in human history. So he's very well known. But the fact that someone's trying to lay claim to this his hometown, that's pretty big for Smyrna, at least at the time. A couple of Homer's famous work were the Iliad and the Odyssey. A lot of that used to be required reading in high school with some of that. And they're very interesting reads. I mean, movies have been made about them too. So, but the name Smyrna comes from the root word myrrh. You've heard of that before, right? The wise men came and offered gifts. It said, here's some gold and frankincense, and one of them said, wait, there's myrrh. Y'all weren't even paying attention. That's all right. Somebody will get it. But it's this root word myrrh comes from the Aramaic word myrrh, M-U-R-R, and it means bitter. It has a very, I've never tasted it, but they say that it has a very bitter, pungent taste, but it has a very aromatic scent. So I guess that would be a lot of things. But myrrh was not something new. It was something that was used a lot. It was used by embalming by the Egyptians. So we know they've been doing that for a long time. It was used in religious ceremonies. It was used for perfumes. And it also had medicinal purposes. They thought that it would help with arthritis and cleansing blood from women. So myrrh was a very very helpful product, and it was also hey, people figured out how they could produce it and sell it. Useful thing.
That's sort of like vanilla flavors now. I mean, come on.
That might be part of its equivalent.
How do you spell it? Myrrh?
Myrrh is M-Y-R-R-H. 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 Myrrh. Now Myrrh was, it was one of the two churches that received no rebuke. Remember, Philadelphia was the other one. And it's only mentioned here in Revelation. But other literature that we have suggests that this was a very sinful city that was very harsh to Christians. And so whenever you read, you know, it talks about Jesus talking about those who have persevered in their circumstances. Now, this city was in competition with Ephesus to be the #1 city. They too had a seaport. They also had a river that flowed from the Hermas Valley right directly into it, so that was a big plus because they could have diversity across a farther region. There was also very good Roman roads that come through here. Smyrna had earned the right to govern themselves because they were an ally to Rome before they were really a force in that region. Some 200 years before the new era began, so they were Rome's early friend, and so they got to kind of govern themselves, which was a privilege. And they also they were one of the first cities to build to the official Roman state goddess Dea Roma. They were also awarded the honor of building a temple to the Emperor Tiberius in 23 AD. So here's where we start. You know, we started seeing where it was called the Roman Republic. They started changing to the Roman Empire, and these Roman emperors started to deify themselves, and so they started allowing cities to build temples to glorify them. So here's one of those things where we see one of the first instances of that. Smyrna had a large library, had a large stadium, a very large public theater. Just a couple pictures here of some of the remains. There weren't too many pictures of Smyrna. Some of these places are built right in the smack dab of a civilized city now. So there's not a whole lot there anymore. But they had this on top of one of their hills it's called Mount Pagus. So they called it the crown of temples because they had a line of temples built on the top of it to all different types of gods and goddesses. So you can imagine what kind of debauchery went on top of there. Then we get to the church of Pergamum. Now, some of you, if you have a King James Version or a New King James Version, it will say Pergamos. Now, there's no difference. There's no difference. It doesn't mean anything different. It's just a slight differing in the way that's spelled, but it means exactly the same thing. So no change there. So if you see Pergamum or Pergamos, don't be alarmed. It means height or elevation. So either way it's spelled means the same thing. Now the reason they called it that, because if you approached it, it's set up kind of high, had a pretty good elevation, so people who saw it be very impressive, especially because it had a very big temple that sit on top of it. About 1,000 feet above the countryside. Had a hillside theater that would seat about 10,000. So it also had a very impressive repertoire there. This was actually the capital city of the Asian province of Rome. So this was a very important city. This city rivaled Alexandria, Egypt for boasting who had the best library. This one had about a 200,000 volume library. And used to, they would get papyrus from Egypt, but once they started started boasting about who had the best library and biggest library, Egypt kind of cut them off. And so there in Pergamum, they had to come up with something different. So they started developing parchment and vellum to make writing materials out of. Another thing that this city was kind of known for was its college of medical priests. So that's very interesting. A couple other pictures, and I can't remember which ones exactly, but a few of these pictures from each of these slides I'm showing you are from somebody who was actually there and sent me the pictures. Some of them are ones I got off the internet. But you can see some very, very impressive remains. You can see that, you know, if you're coming from one of these distant areas and you see this giant temple on top of it, you know, you can't help but be impressed by seeing it. You know, everybody's impressed by big buildings and something, you know, it's like, kind of makes you go, oh, you know.
Is there a way to get up to that temple? Or is it just the columns there and there's no way up to it?
What's that?
Is there like the city columns, but is there like a stairwell up to that temple, or is it just temples that only they can't access?
Well, typically they had, there was roads, or, you know, what they call roads that you could get up to. Some people might call them pig paths today, but, you know, some of them have roads to it. I'm going backwards. Might help if I go forwards. Now you can see how steep that is on the hillside there. You can see right here, you know, there's a roadway. But I mean, all of these are tourist destinations, so you know they have a way to get up there. Now this one here, I can tell you that this picture was one that one of my friends gave me because they took this one. You can see it looks a little different when you're standing down there. But anyway, it's very impressive, and you can see the temple remains up at the top. You know, so these people's building projects, they were no joke. The next is the Church of Thyatira. Now, this was the least significant among the 7 churches that were mentioned. It's located in the modern city of Aski-Hisar. Now, this is one of the places where very little of the city has actually been excavated. So we don't really know what treasures really lie underneath the ground there, and I will show you why very little of it has been excavated. Well, this is the modern city of Thyatira, or what is the modern day is Aski-Hisar. But see right there where I put that pin drop? Right there is where the Church of Thyatira was. Now I blew it up a little bit more. You can see they got looks like that's probably a horse track or something like that. Or that's probably a soccer stadium. But you see that little one block right there? That's all that has been excavated of Thyatira, ancient Thyatira. Because as you can see all the people that live around it? There's nothing to excavate because somebody lives on top of it. So this is all, this one square block is all that has been excavated. So you can see there's not a whole lot to see there. So this is ground level, so if you came through here, this is what you would see. You drive right by it. And of course, there's inscriptions on some of these. I mean, you can see that there's just not a lot there. And so there's no telling what lies in that area that could be uncovered that would tell us more, not only about this ancient city, but about this ancient church. You know, just think of it's not going to be uncovered because, I mean, you think about it, this is in Turkey. Turkey is a predominantly Muslim country. Do you think they're going to start granting access? No. No, they're not. They're going. If this wasn't such a tourist destination, they'd shut this down. They say, well, we can make money off this. It's not important to us, but we like money, so.
Pretty much, the dirt's been taken out of this area. We're seeing what was underneath it before.
Yeah. A lot of that's been dug out. A lot of these columns and stuff. It's, they've had to dig a lot of this out, and there's still some under the dirt. If they ain't got to. And a lot of this, that invading armies came in and they destroyed a lot of the cities and churches. And, these are just the remnants of where these things fell. And so a lot of times, see, like here, these parts here, this is where they've come through and actually found the pieces and actually tried to fit them back together so you can kind of see what it looked like. But a lot of these pieces have been scattered from where they've been destroyed. So this is part of some of the structure that still exists there today. Now the church of Sardis. Now there's not a lot about Sardis. I don't know why, but it seems like Sardis is one of the few cities that the historians don't write a lot about. Because out of all the books that I have, there's hardly anything about Sardis. I don't know, nobody's explained it. I don't know why. I mean, I'm sure there's probably something out there that talks more about it, but I've got a stack of books this tall just on Revelation, and they all talk abundantly about all the other churches, but none of them talk about this one for whatever reason. I don't know why, but a few things we do know: it was a very wealthy city. There was a lot of different trade routes that came into the city, and it is believed that modern coinage was invented in this city. So the very first time that people minted a coin, it was here in this city. Something here. This city, like many of the other cities, had a lot of gods. Here is, they were in a beautiful location. But they had they had a very impressive temple here to different gods. But something there that historians have found is that there was a cooperative kind of not living arrangement, but a cooperative spirit amongst the Christians, the Jews, and the Romans, and all the people that lived there. Now, having said that, this is one of the churches. In his message to this church, he talks about them being a compromising church. So the fact that ancient historians write about being cooperative, but Jesus tells them they're compromising, what does that tell you? Now to me, that'll preach all day long. Because you think about what's happening today with churches compromising. So, I mean, you can read these letters and you can find some good preaching material, let me tell you.
Well, until since back then, if they're compromising, they're worldly.
Yep. That's exactly right. Now, it was another place, Jesus didn't mention them having any persecution either. Now, he did with the other ones, but not that one, so what does that tell you? Now, if you listen to my message the other week, I said, the devil ain't messing with you, it means he probably already got you. So that goes along with Jesus' message of them being compromised.
What is that? What are you too far gone or what?
No, it just means that they were just compromising with the world. It didn't mean that they couldn't come back out of it.
Okay.
You know, because I mean, this is ancient history, 2,000 years ago when this was written. So obviously they could work it out. They could come out of it. But Jesus warned them and told us, hey, you know, you're compromised.
Well, what about people that's got their hearts is hardened? They can't come back, can they?
Well, the Bible tells us there's not but one unforgivable sin, and it's blaspheming of the Holy Spirit. And so, you know,
So it's never too late as long as you're breathing.
Yep. Now, this is some of the flooring that's been uncovered. You know, a lot of like different tiles, great mosaics. You know, they would. Now, if I remember correctly, this is from later. This is not actually from John's time, but this is actually like 3 to 4 centuries later when there was a church built. If I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but I think this is what this was from. And I think also that there were some mosaics of some Christian symbols that they uncovered here. But very, very, very artistic work amongst the early Christians. And this, you know, this is not the only place. There's a lot of other ancient churches that have been uncovered that have a lot of this very beautiful artistic mosaic work on like floors and stuff like that. The Church of Philadelphia. Now this one here, I think y'all probably recognize this city name more than you do any other, obviously because we got one here in America, and it's called, you know, Philadelphia. You know, phileo in Greek means love. Delphia means brother, or so. You know, you put the two words together and you get the city of brotherly love. So that's what we call it here today, the city of brotherly love. So that's carried right over from the original Greek. But the Church of Philadelphia, that was it came from the King Attalus II, and it's actually the city was actually named that because of the love that this brother had for his other brother. It was it was actually named by a noble cause. Go figure, right? Something good come out of that time period. Today, in Turkey, this is called Ali Hisher. Ali Sheher, I mean, it's a
Bless
weird,
you.
yeah. It's a weird name. It's about 377 square miles, so it's not real large. But one of the things about this city, it was known for its grapes. It was great wine country. So with great wine country came great drinkers. And so, there was, obviously, there would be, there were gods dedicated to drink, especially Dionysus. And so that was a god of wine.
So like, is that where like you think like the Italian people, not here, that's why the Italian wine is so famous, because they carried that history culture there, or?
I don't know. This was a very, I guess in that day it was a very culturally rich city. Jesus praised this church. He did not rebuke this church. And this church, or this city anyway, was called Little Athens because it was a smaller version of the ancient Greek city of Athens, and it was, had idols, many gods and goddesses. And so, the fact, this was a church that was doing their job. They were planted in a very, very pagan city. And Jesus did nothing but praise them for the job that they were doing. That's the kind of remarks that our church or any church would want to get. Wherever they're planted at, you want to get praise, for not compromising the message and being a strong advocate for Jesus. That's what we want. Now, just a couple pictures here. There's not a lot to show of Philadelphia. Again, there's not much of it. These are some huge columns that was built. And I showed you, this is another picture, because I want to show you how big they were. See that little person down there at the base of it? This picture here, you really can't tell until you look at that one and see how that little bitty person right there, that's a big old column. And it seems to be I think there's like 4 or 6 of these things in there. So pretty impressive work there, like with all these. But again, there's not really a lot there to show, because again, it's a small place that hasn't really been excavated too much. And now we get to the old city of the Church of Laodicea. Now this is the one that you probably are most familiar with, at least from Revelation, because you've probably heard it preached so many times about being the fence riding church. And I want to kind of give you a different perspective on that, because it's not really accurate the way that a lot of pastors portray this message, and I'll show you why. Whenever he says, I wish that you were either hot or cold, but because you're not, because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's because they're fence riders. Notice what Jesus says. If you want to turn to chapter 3 and look at it and see for yourself. Chapter 3, starting verse 14. You can go down to 15. Look at verse 15, chapter 3. He said, I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. Basically there, what he's saying, he said, I wish you were one or the other. Now, let me ask you this. most pastors will preach it that Jesus is saying, I wish you were either for me or against me. Because think about it, fence riders, you either get on one side or the other. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying, I wish you were either hot or I wish you were cold. And he's not saying it in a bad context. He's saying, I wish you were one or the other. But you're not. You're not hot, nor are you cold. You're something's worse. And I'll show you why. Now let's talk a little bit about Laodicea. Laodicea, obviously very popular. This was a place that it was a center of 3 major trade routes that come through there, so they had a lot of trade going on. A lot of commerce, a lot of different peoples. Now they actually had a route that went all the way to Ephesus, so they had almost a route that went straight to the seaports. So they really had, you know, quite a good system that they used there. A large religious population, including Christians, Greeks, Romans, Jews, a whole melting pot of a lot of people. They all worship different gods. Emperor worship was included here. And there were people who traveled here from all over for medical treatment. And it tells here about that medical treatment, about the something in the clay that they would sell, eye salve, that it would help them to see. Now Jesus talks about giving them something to open their spiritual eyes. So, you know, Jesus says something in each of these messages to the churches that clearly have something to do with what they're doing in that present time, but also gives them a spiritual message at the same time. But here's some of the remains that you can see of Laodicea, the walkways that go. This was one of the actual pictures that was sent to me. I can't remember. I think that might be my buddy Sam right there, because he was on that trip. But you can see, you know, these great walkways, the pillars to these roadways. And this is part of the old stadium there. Now, I want you to take a look at this next picture and tell me what you see. Look like snow. All right, now there's two cities that are very important to Laodicea, because Laodicea does not naturally have its own water. So it got its water from 2 different places. All right? Now, looks like snow. It's salt. Now, these are hot springs. People would come from all over to soak in these hot spring baths. Have you ever soaked in a, you know, today they make a fortune off of bath salts. You know, good for your joints, good for your muscles. Now, this is natural. This is naturally occurring, so people go here and soak in these things. All right? So you can see, you know, this, it looks like snow, but it's not. But all the minerals in these hot springs that come out, and they form all these, see all these right here? All these, those are all pools. You can go and sit in all them pools. That looks relaxing, don't it?
Well, not too many critters live in it either.
No, they can't survive. But see, you know, these pools are everywhere over there in this area. All right, and this was from Hierapolis. All right, now Hierapolis was several miles away, and they had these hot springs. And I included this picture just because I thought it was really pretty. But you know, you've got all these hot springs, and off of this you've got hot water. Now this hot water, they built aqueducts to trap this water because they needed water. They didn't have a natural source of water. They didn't have a natural spring or anything like that. So they had to get water from somewhere so that they could use. You can't survive without water. That was one of the reasons they got overtaken, because all you had to do was cut off the water, and there you go. You're done. So, that wasn't the first place that's ever been taken over that way. Well, there, they got their hot water from Hierapolis. So the hot water would flow several miles. Now, what do you think happened by the time it came, nice and steaming hot water by the time it travels a few miles? Now, it wasn't hot anymore, was it? It wasn't cold either. It was what? Lukewarm. All right? You see where Jesus is using their present situation, their present culture to tell them something? So they're getting hot water from Hierapolis, and it's lukewarm by the time it gets there. Now, at the source, all of this hot water is good. It's healing. What are things you use hot water for? You boil water to get the impurities out of it, to make it drinkable. You can sit in it, take a bath, because it helps your joint, makes you feel good. Hot water is good for a lot of things. You can cook with it. There's, wash clothes with it. There's a lot of things that hot water is good for. Now, by the time it gets there and it's lukewarm water is not really good for anything, is it? Now, let's turn the tables. Now, there was another very influential city that also got water. They built an aqueduct to get water from, and it was from the city of Colossae. Now, they had very tall mountains with snow. Now, they built aqueducts to catch this water runoff, and they channeled it to the city. So they were trying to get cold water, but what do you think happened by the time it traveled a few miles and got there? Well, cold no more, was it? What was it?
Lukewarm.
Now, what's cold water good for? Good to drink, ain't it? With snow, you can actually take the snow and you can take it and make water out of it. You can melt it down. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of good things that come from hot water and cold water. So at the source, they're both really good. But by the time they get to their destination and they're lukewarm, what are they good for? Lukewarm water is not good to drink with. And lukewarm water, typically, it's stagnant.
You would say it's good for mosquitoes.
Exactly. It's not only good for mosquitoes, it's good for bacteria.
Yes.
So you think about stinky, stale, lukewarm water, what it's good for. See, Jesus, when he said, I wish you were just one or the other. I wish you were either hot or I wish you were cold, but you're neither. You're lukewarm. He's saying you're not good for anything. He's literally saying, lukewarm water can make you sick.
That's a good one. Never heard that. That really explains it.
So it's not really about fence riding, because Jesus wouldn't. I tried to explain this to somebody and they just couldn't get it out of their head. Jesus would never say, I wish you would just be an unbeliever. Do you think Jesus would say something like that? No. Because he died for that person too, right? So Jesus is not going to say, I wish you were an unbeliever or a believer. He's saying, I wish you were hot, you were good for something. I wish you were cold, you were good for something, but you're not. You're good for nothing. I wish you were one or the other, but you're stagnant. And that fits a lot of churches today. You're stagnant. He said, look, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. You make me sick. And if you really look at it, that is very strong language from Jesus. You make me sick. Because why else would he say, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth? Because lukewarm water is not fit to drink, and it can physically make you sick. So when you think about what Jesus is saying there, their cultural significance, there's a lot of significance that Jesus uses of their present situation. And I wish more pastors would understand this and learn this and teach it this way. Because there is a lot that they miss because they're not really studying this. They're going off of what other pastors before them have said. But every word that Jesus said and John wrote down has significance for each and every one of these cities. And the reason I didn't do it with the other cities, they have equally important messages. I did this one because this one, this one most of all. And so you would have been more familiar with this. I think you would have understood and got this one better than any of the rest of them. So that's why I chose this one. But
Jesus said, "I'm gonna spew you out of my mouth." Does that sound like Jesus is through with you?
notice he said, "I'm about." No, actually, he says here, "I will spit you out of my mouth."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that mean he's through with you?
I think, when you look at these, each of these are warnings. Each of these are warnings.
Trying to straighten you up.
Yeah, because, all right, now take that. He's saying, yeah, because you're neither, you're good for nothing, you're this way, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. But if you read down, what does he talk about? He talks about that knocking on the door.
Yeah. Well, get your attention.
Yeah. Now, why have he, if he truly said, "I'm done with you," why would he say, "Well, here's an invitation"? So he's giving them a warning saying, look, this is what I'm going to do. And as you read through Revelation, because see, all of these letters would have been sent to all the other churches too. And everybody else would have read this. So this would have been a warning for all these people.
Make you think.
Yeah, so this, after they read this, and then as they read the rest of Revelation, they would have said, "Oh my gosh, if we don't straighten things out, God's going to pour out His wrath, and oh man, I don't want to be a part of that." So, this was a great warning and a great invitation.
Well, like Scripture said, there's no respect for God anymore. There's no fear for God anymore. And God wants you to fear Him.
A healthy fear, yep. A respectful fear. Well, that's all we're going to do today. Like I said, next week we'll go over key verses next week, and like I said, I've only gotten one question, one thing to talk about. So if you got something else, you better get it to me before next Wednesday, or else you're just gonna miss out on that question. If you ask me one next week, I'll try and answer it, but may not be as thorough as what it could have been. But y'all got my number, y'all got my email. Think something, you can email me or text me or whatever, call me. I'll try and do what I can for it next week. But I'll have this stuff wrote down, printed out for you next week, so you don't have to remember all that stuff. But I would highly encourage you to read. Spend a little bit more time on the second, third chapter, and really read through the 7 churches, because there's really a lot of things there that really deal with us today. That messages that we can really apply today. Any questions?
Do your praise.
All right.
I had that scope down my throat yesterday, like Freddie did,
Mm-hmm.
and got a good report.
Good. Good. Praise the Lord. Good deal.
You heard that, Nancy, to stick around a little bit longer, you'll stay right with us.
I've been through one, I don't want to know.
Right.
Ain't no fun.
Anything else? All right, well, if there's nothing else, then we'll adjourn for this week, and we'll pick it back up next week and finish out this. finish out this whole series that we've been going through. Seems like it's been a long journey, but we're getting to the end of it. Hope you've enjoyed it and learned something. Anyway, thank y'all, appreciate it. Ronnie, you close out Thursday.